Hi, and welcome to the Existential Coach. On this episode, I want to talk about something I would not normally venture into, which is perhaps saying something considering the kind of topics I touch upon either directly or indirectly in these podcasts. But one of the things that kind of came up recently has to do with Harry and Meg. Now, I should say that I don't, nor have I ever, really known that much about the royal family. I knew, of course, that they exist. For example, Harry and his brother William, I wasn't clear on their names. I'd heard of Meghan Markle as an actress. I'd never seen the show she was on, but her name is really easy for me to remember. It's my sister's name. So I say this because as much as I can be in my own little world thinking about things, I am aware that there is this world out there where the trials and travails of the royal family are a dominant force in our cultural experience, and that this plays out in a variety of ways. What interests me is not so much the story of Meg and Harry, although I will say I did watch the Netflix series and really liked it, and I thought these were very nice people, and that was kind of it. But what is really kind of piqued my interest is the kerfuffle around them, particularly as it pertains to the book Spare, which I have not read, and that's kind of the point. So obviously I'm not going to talk about a book I haven't read, but what I find fascinating about the experience that this book has kind of been a catalyst for is a set of conversations that seem to portend to be about the book or to be about Harry or to be about Meg, yet can't be, because the comments are coming either based upon excerpts from the book or, and this is more often the case, that the speaking or talking, the writing, the theorizing, the whatever you want to call it, the interpretations, broadly speaking, the interpretations that are being made about this seem to operate in a way that has, from what I can tell, really nothing to do with Meg or Harry. So the reason why I'm doing this podcast was because of one Facebook post I saw. Now, I'm not really, as I said, dialed into the whole royal thing. I'm aware of it. I'm on Earth, so I know it's happening, but I'm not really dialed into it. So I don't get any of it in my feed. It doesn't show up in any way, shape, or form. Yet, a person I know on Facebook commented, and what she said really interested me. She said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, "I'm not going to read the book," and explained her choice to not read the book as a form of protest, as a kind of statement that I'm not going to do that. And that was very, very interesting to me. So, again, it's not that we should or shouldn't read the book. I don't care. But what is interesting is the notion that she was making a statement out of her act to post to the world, "I'm letting you know, fellow Earthlings, that I am not going to read this book." And then somebody replied, "I'm not going to either, but I really like the commentary." And there's something really interesting to me about this, that we're talking about two people, and of course their family, their kids, extended family, and so on and so forth. Yet there's a complete willingness and a blatant, clearly made statement that I'm not going to actually find out what I'm talking about. I'm not going to read the book that Harry wrote. I'm not going to really get into this other than to participate in the carnival of this experience. And that, to me, is my statement, my protest, my claim for what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, so on and so forth. Yet, what's so fascinating is if you think about that, a person is saying, I will not know, and that in and of itself demonstrates that I do not need to know to have my reason, which indicates the status I have, the poise I am taking, the perspective, the whatever you want to call it. You can almost imagine it like if a kid is pretending to be a parent, right? Pretending to be an adult. One of the kind of sobering things you can see is the kid will start to mirror essentially tyranny, right? They'll see, okay, well, I'm going to play the role of the adult, which means you now have to do what I say. And the rules won't necessarily make sense, which in and of itself reflects how the child is hearing the adult's rule, which, again, don't actually make sense. Of course, to the adult, the assumption is, well, they make sense to me, they're right, and I learned them, and I had to deal with them, therefore you have to learn them, you have to deal with them. But what's actually happening here is there's a form of implicit structure based within a power structure that is just being mirrored, but it's not coherent. So when a person says, I'm not going to read this book, and I want you all to know that, and this is my defiance, I find that really fascinating. And that, oddly enough, got me interested in Harry and Meg. Again, I wasn't not interested in them in the sense of I'm not involved, but I didn't really know much about them. And it wasn't a part of my, it's not on my social media feeds. It's not something I'm thinking about. Obviously, with the advent of the book and the Netflix series, I was aware that there was something going on. But it was this idea that this person was going to engage and do so by declaring that they would not actually read what this person said. So, again, I haven't read the book, and if I had more time, I would, but I'm probably not going to. Although, you never know. So I'm not going to talk about the book. But now what I want to do is back up a little bit and talk about the Netflix series that I watched. Now, when I will mention, and I've mentioned it to a couple people, I've seen that series, they will similarly say, well, I'm not going to watch it because this is just rich people problems. And if I was there, as rich as them, I wouldn't be complaining. Now, I must confess, I did not find anything enviable about their situation. At no point, at any time in that documentary did I think, I really wish I was in their situation. I like them as a couple, like I like them together, as two people. But in terms of their position and the intense focus on them, there was nothing about that appealed to me. So all I liked that really resonated with me was the appeal of their love story as these two people who fell in love. Everything beyond that seemed like a complete disaster to me. It doesn't appeal to me in any way. I don't see the affluence or the social circles or any of that stuff as helpful. So I was looking at it less in terms of this is an enviable situation, more in terms of this is a very precarious situation. And this is where we start to, for me, think about what's the structure that's going on here. And again, it wasn't something that I thought a lot about, but if you think about implicit structures and how implicit structures work, they effectively tyrannize our subjectivity in a way to fit the extrinsic nature of that implicit structure, right? It has a different kind of function. So William, the eldest, is the next in line to be king. So the structure of that already creates a certain kind of availability of choice. And this is where we get into the existential question of choice, authenticity and inauthenticity. So if we take it from a Heideggerian point of view, the inauthentic is the habitual behavior, habitual role, the pattern, the sequence, whatever it is that we accept implicitly without challenging. To do that is to be inauthentic. Whereas to be authentic is to question that role. Now, what's interesting here is, if you think about this, again, this is just structurally, you have Queen Elizabeth, then her son Charles, and then William. When Elizabeth is alive, William is further away from the implicit structure of his role, his one-day actualized role as king. Which means there's a certain amount of avoidance, suspended belief, whatever term you want to use, that is available to the reality that he shares with his brother, Harry. Yet, when Queen Elizabeth died, that removed a layer, bringing more into the realm of reality the fact that sooner rather than later, William would become king. So now if you think about, well, what is the role of this monarchy? Well, this is not a political monarchy, right? It's not, they don't choose governments. They don't dictate power. They don't do these kinds of things that you might find of yesteryear, right? So they're represent a symbolic head of state, which means that the symbolism is all the more important, right? Because we're not talking about the kind of power where they are going to command the military to do certain things. They're going to, all of these command the church to do these certain things. They don't have that kind of control that they might have had 500 years ago. So I say this just to emphasize the importance of the symbolic role, because it is actually the only role that exists. And so how is a family affected when the symbolic role of individuals shifts? If you have two brothers and their relationship is protected within a social structure by the fact that other people are playing certain roles, then they're able to maintain that in a kind of lateral sense, right? They can connect to whatever degree based upon this mutuality. But when the structure changes, they're the same people, but notice what happens. Everything structurally changes. And this is what's really interesting to me about this experience, is the condemnation that's happening, the way in which we're thinking about this in terms of these are individuals, Harry, Meg, and William and Kate, and so on and so forth. We're thinking about these as people and forgetting that we're actually looking at this, we can actually look at this as a structure, and to that structure we have a relationship. And that's where it comes in, where all of a sudden we're the people looking at them saying, well, I'm not going to read his book because this is a problem, because I'm going to just say no to his book, like Nancy Reagan saying no to drugs. To me, it kind of sounds almost like an absurdist play, that we're pretending to engage in a debate on something when we're not really, in a substantive way, asking ourselves about this structural change that has happened to a family. So if we step outside of the royals for a second, and we think about the way in which things change in our families when people age, or if somebody passes away, somebody moves, and the dynamics that start to shift, siblings where one has a career making a lot of money and the other one doesn't. These structural things start to affect the personal dynamics to such an extent that we can't help but, at least on some level, realize or experience that the subjective relationship that we thought we had has actually been trumped by the structural relationship that has been imposed. We, in other words, think we have freedom, think we're acting with our own agency, when in fact there is so many controls laid upon us that the actual number of choices are kind of an illusion that we think we can engage because we need to, in some way, conceive of ourselves as being free, because that is a kind of epistemological way of understanding ourselves in the world in this time, in this place, which is to say we're all supposed to be free, we're all supposed to fall in love, we're all supposed to succeed, we're all supposed to do all of these dynamic, vibrant, wonderful things, we're all supposed to, in short, flourish. Yet, when you start to look at the structural impediments, not even impediments, the structural barriers like race, it becomes harder, certainly as we awaken to the notion of the implicit structures of power as exercised through, for example, race, and we see how these implicit structures actually start to reveal the way in which our freedom is always controlled, always curtailed, that we are always operating within this inauthentic space. So that's why when I look at the documentary with Meg and Harry, I'm not envious, because I see it as that's a lot of not having choices, right? That, yeah, they have resources to go and hide certain places that may seem kind of nice or exotic, but they have to go and hide there. That's my issue, right? I'm thinking, yeah, but they can't just walk down the street. They can't just even stay in one location for a period of time without expecting camera people to show up and take photos and to invade their privacy. They can't, in a way, expect freedom, because the explicit structure of their lives, and this is where we get into explicit versus implicit, but the explicit structure of their lives is, well, because they're royals, and this is the English kind of mentality as I understand it, is they're bought and paid for by the governance, by the citizenry, and have to kind of dance with the one who brung them. And this is really interesting, because now you get into the situation where the people without feel like, and this is a complete kind of fallacy, that they have control over the people with. They have this idea that the royals have everything, but we control them. And it's just not true. Similarly, the royals are playing this game in their own way, right? In terms of how they're conceiving of their relationship with the citizenry, what that means with the Commonwealth, what that means, and their symbolic role, which is all they have, because as I said before, there is no actual structural power in the classical sense of what a monarchy would be, right? So this creates a whole different dynamic in terms of how one understands their implicit and explicit structures within this overarching theme of power. And that's why I'm thinking about particularly Harry and William and the nature of their relationship as brothers to a mother who died in a relationship that was clearly dysfunctional, because that was broadcast to everybody, and was organized for explicit reasons, which created implicit problems. Long story short, and simple way of saying this, it was FUBAR, right? It was kind of messed up from the start. And this starts to perhaps reveal what I think is really moving about this, which is there is this conflict between form and the tradition, the need for continuity, and which is repeated. I don't think it's particularly provocative of me to say that the narrative continuity, the narrative of continuity within the royals more broadly is kind of an argument that this is what's going to keep things together, right? This is the way to stay the course. Yet on the other side, there is a shift, and by marrying kind of outside of that world, Megan's an American, by marrying outside of that world, there is this, and this is, I think, fascinating, an almost ontological shift to change, to growth, to questioning, to challenge, to, if you think about it as one brother had to choose, just by the birthing order, being king, the other chose the anti-king. And as was pointed out to me, that's not what the title spare means, but I think of it in terms of the anti-king as in, if the role of the king is to provide a symbolic order that creates continuity within a social or cultural structure, then the anti-king operates outside of that. And going back to the person who posted, I'm not going to read that person's book, is, could we say on some level that this person was saying, I'm not going to acknowledge the anti-king. I'm not going to acknowledge a structure that operates outside of this current system. I will participate in criticizing the royals. I will participate in lambasting them or doing whatever it is that people do. But I'm still in that kind of game, if you will. And I say game not I don't want to de-emphasize how profoundly impactful this is on people, but just to illustrate how it's treated like a very malicious game, a game to the death, you could say, within our society, a kind of almost epic destruction that we need to pretend we have control over. Like, we want to pretend we have control over the gladiators. We want to pretend we have control over our favorite sports teams. We want to pretend we have, but none of it is actually real. It's all fantasy. But it's fantasy within an inauthentic understanding of our experience. Whereas the anti-king, in a sense, starts to move towards something else. It's not clear what that is, and I have no idea what that is. But it certainly does raise questions about the whole notion of the symbolic king as such. And the reaction against, because again, as a therapist, people will say to me, well, he was talking about this and he was talking about that and talking about having sex with people and talking about his penis and talking about these kinds of things. None of which seems strange to me, right? And I've even said to people, and this is not because, I've been coaching and therapy. This is because, I have a social media, like I have an Instagram account and I have a Facebook account, and the amount of times people are doing and showing and saying things like talking about penis, talking about sex, talking about all of these kinds of things. This really, we're pretending to be shocked. We're pretending to be outraged. What I find it kind of striking about it is we're pretending that we're offended. There's nothing offensive about it. It's a person talking about their experience. If you don't like it, well, why don't you like it? Well, they shouldn't say that. Why shouldn't they say that? Why shouldn't this person talk? Were they rude? Did they harm you? No. They shouldn't step outside of the symbolic order, the inauthentic world as I understand it. And they represent to me a way of looking at the world that I do not acknowledge, because I am bound to my inauthentic existence, which is to say, I'm bound to the patterns of my existence. And this is where I want to come to what will be the final kind of point, is the insipid way that race has been, I don't want to say covertly carried within this, because there's nothing covert about it. But there has been this arguably dangerous game, and again, I'm thinking about how I was using the word game earlier, that it has this really dire effect. There's been this dangerous game with playing with racism that starts to make me wonder, are we trying to find new ways to operationalize racism within our current structure of society that does not and will not acknowledge equality and equity. And we do it by changing a word here, pretending, well, really just pretending that we're not being racist, pretending that by saying, oh, I'm not racist, that's enough. And if that is the case that we can engage in this form of delusion, then it says to me that there's a dangerous form of denial that becomes implicit within, whether it's the royal family or political organizations or bodies or governments or whatever it is, that can say, oh, well, we're not really racist because we're the royals or because we're this government head or whatever it is. And that allows people to believe something that is simply not true, which is we are racist. There is simply no question about it. We operate in our understanding of others as if race is a category that we can use to define people. And in so doing, we then use race as a standalone criteria for power. And then we operationalize power within structures, political, economic, and so on. All of which is a manner of being in the world that is inauthentic because it is operating based within this kind of implicit protection of control that actually stops us from being free, yet at the same time creates the illusion of choice. However, notice all of the choices have been picked for us. The choice to say, I'm not going to read that book. That's what my statement is. The choice that says, well, they shouldn't complain. They're rich. These have been orchestrated in such a way that we can feel emboldened in our statements, yet remain completely inauthentic as we are captured inside a structure of interpersonal relations that does not allow us to see some very fundamental things, which is, I don't need to get along with Harry and Meg, right? We're never going to talk to one another, right? There's no relationship per se, and there simply never will be. But what there is our intentions in how we act towards others. And if we seek to transcend our own complicit role within these structures, if we seek to push past the habits, the patterns, if we seek to break down the symbolic codes of conduct, be they well-intentioned or other, then if we don't take these down, then we're not going to be able to see who we might be. What was interesting to me in watching the Netflix series with Meg and Harry was seeing who they might be, seeing who they might become. And I resonate with that very simple yet profound exploration of self, where a person can say, I want to see who I might become and be that which I may be free to become. And I do not know the answer, and I do not know the way, but I will still take a leap of faith, standing and moving beyond this implicit structure. So I hope you found something kind of at least interesting in this podcast to kind of think a little bit about. Again, I have no specific views about how one should or shouldn't think about this, as I never really have any specific views about how one should or shouldn't think about this. I do think it is interesting to explore what has become such a kind of touchstone for people, and clearly something that, as I can tell, and I could go on, but I won't, as I can tell, has become such a resonant experience for people. And I wonder about why that is beyond what I see as being pretty superficial. So with that, I'll say bye for now.